silence, not the absence of sound, the presence of refusal. There is a difference. Silence can be empty. A room with no one in it, a phone that doesn't ring, a street at 4 a.m. That kind of silence weighs nothing. But the silence of a hand extended and not taken, that silence has mass. It fills the space between two people with something heavier than air, something that presses against the chest and makes the next second feel longer than the last. A hand was offered, a hand was refused. The man who offered it was the fastest human being on the planet. His fists could travel from rest to contact in 600ths of a second. His body could cross a room before a normal person could finish blinking. He had spent his entire adult life eliminating the space between intention and action, compressing every movement into its smallest possible window, turning speed into an art form and patience into something he had almost no use for. He sat in a folding chair for 40 minutes. The man who refused the handshake was the greatest actor who ever lived. He had spent his entire adult life eliminating the space between himself and other people, fictional people, characters, ghosts made of ink and dialogue and cotton stuffed in cheeks. He could disappear inside another human being so completely that the people around him forgot he was performing. He didn't act, he vacated. He left his own body and let someone else move in, and the someone else was so real, so specific, so physically present that crew members who had worked with him for months would sometimes call him by the character's name without realizing it. He waved Bruce Lee away with the back of his hand, the gesture of a king dismissing a servant, the gesture of a man who decides who exists and who doesn't. Bruce Lee sat down and waited. No punch was thrown, no technique was applied, no kick, no block, no strike, no wrist lock. This was not a fight. This was something more dangerous than a fight. This was two men measuring each other without touching. One of them was the most disciplined body in the world. The other wasn't even himself. What Bruce Lee said when the 40 minutes ended was a single sentence, 12 words. The actor heard them and sat down, not in his leather chair, in a folding chair. Next to Bruce, he had never sat down for anyone. The Paramount Pictures studio lot occupied 65 acres on the south side of Melrose Avenue in Hollywood, California. It had been there since 1926. It was the oldest continuously operating major studio lot in Los Angeles, and in March of 1972, it looked exactly the way a place that has been making dreams and nightmares for 46 years should look, beautiful from certain angles, exhausted from others, and everywhere haunted by the residue of 10,000 stories that had been told inside its walls and released into the world like smoke from a factory that manufactured mythology. The Bronson Gate stood at the main entrance on Marathon Street, wrought iron, Spanish colonial revival, the most photographed studio gate in Hollywood. Past the gate, the lot spread in a grid of 2-story office buildings, sound stages the size of aircraft hangars, narrow alleys between fake building facades, and golf carts carrying producers who were always late for meetings they had scheduled themselves. The air smelled like sawdust from the carpentry shop, fresh latex paint from the scenic department, and coffee from the commissary, where studio executives ate tuna melts at tables adjacent to grips, eating the same tuna melts and pretending they didn't notice each other. In March 1972, Soundstage 9 was the most important room on the lot. It housed the primary interior sets for a film called The Godfather, directed by a 32-year-old named Francis Ford Coppola, who had been hired because he was Italian and cheap, and whom the studio had tried to fire at least twice. The production was over budget. The shooting schedule was behind. The studio head, Robert Evans, was receiving daily reports that the film was either a masterpiece or a disaster, depending on which crew member he asked and what time of day he asked them. There was no middle opinion. The film was a coin in the air, and it had been in the air for 12 weeks, and nobody knew which side it would land on. Inside Soundstage 9, a recreation of a New York office occupied most of the floor space. Dark wood paneling, heavy green curtains drawn against windows that were actually painted flats, lit from behind to simulate afternoon light. A desk the size of a dining table, covered in props, a telephone, a stack of papers, a crystal decanter of what was actually iced tea, leather chairs positioned for the camera. The room was Vito Corleone's study, the room where an empire was administered, the room where favors were granted and denied, and where the word no had consequences that extended beyond the conversation. Bruce Lee arrived at the Paramount lot at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. He was not there for a meeting. He was not there for an audition. He was not there because anyone at Paramount Pictures had invited him, or wanted him, or knew his name. He was there to visit a friend, a stuntman named Jerry Petit, a former student who had been working on The Godfather for 3 weeks as part of the stunt coordination team, and who had called Bruce the previous evening and said, "You have to come see this. There's an actor on this set who does something I've never seen before. He disappears, like you disappear, but he does it without moving." Bruce had driven from Bel Air to Hollywood in his black Porsche. He had parked on a side street off Melrose, walked to the Marathon Street entrance, and presented a visitor's pass that Jerry had arranged with the production office. The security guard looked at the pass, looked at Bruce, and waved him through with the disinterested efficiency of a man who processed 200 visitor passes a week and had stopped being impressed by any of them around pass number 40. Bruce Lee walked through the Bronson Gate and onto the most important studio lot in Hollywood, and nobody looked at him twice. He was 31 years old. 5 feet 7 inches, 135 pounds. He wore a grey cotton t-shirt with no logo, dark jeans, and a pair of white Onitsuka tiger shoes that were beginning to yellow at the rubber edges from thousands of hours of training. No jacket, no sunglasses, no jewelry, no watch. The visitor's pass was clipped to his front jeans pocket with a small metal clasp. He looked like a Grip's nephew. He looked like a production assistant who had been sent to pick up sandwiches. He looked like the least significant person who would walk through that gate all day. The irony was not lost on him. It was never lost on him. Bruce Lee, in March 1972, existed in a paradox that would have driven most men insane and that drove Bruce to a fury. He controlled with the same precision he controlled his fists. In Hong Kong, he was the biggest movie star in Asia. The big boss had broken every box office record in the territory. Fist of Fury was about to do the same. His face was on posters the size of buildings. His name was spoken in restaurants and taxicabs and newspaper headlines. He was worshipped with an intensity that bordered on religious, because he was the first Chinese man to stand at the center of an action film and refuse to lose, refuse to bow, refuse to play the servant or the sidekick or the comic relief, or any of the roles that Hollywood had spent 50 years assigning to Asian faces. In Hollywood, he was a visitor's pass on a pair of jeans. He was negotiating with Warner Brothers for a film that would eventually become Enter the Dragon. The negotiations were slow, condescending, and saturated with the specific brand of racism that doesn't announce itself with slurs, but with questions like, can an Asian man carry a picture in the American market? And would audiences accept a Chinese lead? And what if we gave him an American co-star, someone the audience can relate to? Bruce answered these questions with the calm, measured, burning patience of a man who knew that the answer to every one of them was already written in box office receipts in Hong Kong, and that the only thing standing between him and the American audience was the imagination of the men asking the questions. He walked through the Paramount lot, past Soundstage 4, where a television pilot was shooting, past the scenic shop, where a carpenter was building a fake brick wall, past the commissary, where the smell of grilled cheese and tomato soup escaped through a propped-open door. Nobody stopped him. Nobody recognized him. He moved through the infrastructure of the American film industry like a ghost, present, visible, and completely unregistered. Jerry Petit met him near the back entrance to Soundstage 9. Jerry was 28, stocky, with the compressed build of a man who had spent 6 years training under Bruce and 4 years doing stunt work in Hollywood. He shook Bruce's hand, walked him through a fire door into the back of the soundstage, and led him down a narrow corridor that smelled like plywood and electrical tape. He's in the staging area, Jerry said, keeping his voice low. Between setups. He stays in character between takes, sometimes for hours. Doesn't break until he decides to break. The crew works around him. Who? Bruce asked. You'll know when you see him. Don't take it personally if he doesn't acknowledge you. He's not being rude. He's not there. Not where. Not in himself. He's in the other guy. Chen Wei. They emerged from the corridor into a large staging area, adjacent to the main set. The space was functional and unglamorous. Bare concrete floor, exposed ductwork overhead, folding tables covered in call sheets and continuity photographs. A craft services station with 3 coffee urns and a half-eaten tray of Italian sandwiches. Cables taped to the floor in thick coloured bundles. Lighting rigs on wheeled stands pushed against the walls. A makeup station with 3 mirrors and a barber's chair sat in the corner. The chair had a name on the back, but the name was covered with a strip of gaffer tape, as if the person who sat there didn't want to be reminded of who they were, while someone else's face was being applied over their own. In the center of the staging area, 15 feet from where Bruce stood, a man sat in a leather chair. The chair had been brought from the set. It was large, high-backed, the kind of chair that existed not for comfort but for authority. The leather was dark brown, cracked with age, the seat cushion compressed by years of use. It was Vito Corleone's chair. It belonged in front of Vito Corleone's desk in Vito Corleone's study, but it was here, in the staging area, because the man sitting in it had decided that the chair came with him between takes. Nobody argued, nobody moved it back. The man in the chair was not tall, 5'9", maybe 5'10" in the polished black Oxfords he was wearing, shoes that belonged to another decade, another coast, another man entirely. He weighed approximately 170 pounds, but the weight sat on his frame in a way that made him appear both larger and older than he was. His face was heavy. Jowls hung from a jawline that had been strong in youth and was now softened by age, or rather by the performance of age, because the man in the chair was only 47 years old, though the character he was playing was in his mid-60s. His cheeks were full, slightly distended, pushed outward by something inside his mouth, cotton. As Bruce would later learn, small wads tucked between the gums and the inner cheek, a physical modification that changed the shape of the face, the sound of the voice, the speed of the speech, and through those changes, the speed of the thought. The cotton was the foundation. Everything else was built on top of it. His hair was slicked back, dark but greying at the temples in a pattern that was half nature, half makeup department. He wore a dark charcoal suit, three-piece, single-breasted, with a white dress shirt and a dark tie knotted in a thick Windsor. A single rose was pinned to his left lapel. The rose was red, fresh, the petals still tight. Someone replaced it every morning. The rose was not a costume choice. It was a character choice. Vito Corleone wore a rose because Vito Corleone was a man who appreciated beauty and controlled violence, and saw no contradiction between the two. A cat sat on his lap, an orange tabby. The cat was asleep, curled in the depression between the man's thighs, its tail hanging over his left knee. The man's left hand rested on the cat's back and moved in a slow, rhythmic stroke, thumb traveling from the crown of the cat's head to the base of its ears. 3 inches per stroke, never 2, never 4, 3. The rhythm was metronometric. The consistency was inhuman. This was not a man petting a cat. This was a character petting a cat. And the character had decided that 3 inches was the correct distance and 4 seconds was the correct interval, and any deviation from that pattern would be a betrayal of the man he was pretending to be. His right hand rested on the arm of the leather chair, motionless. The fingers were relaxed but not limp, each one placed with the specificity of a man who understood that a hand on an armrest communicates power only if the hand appears to have chosen its position rather than fallen into it. His eyes were half closed, not sleeping, the opposite of sleeping, watching the room from behind heavy lids with the patient, calculating surveillance of a man who decided who mattered and who didn't, who entered and who was turned away, who lived and who. Bruce stopped walking. He stood 30 feet from the leather chair, and he read the man the way he read every human body he encountered, automatically, completely, in under 2 seconds. Breathing pattern, deep, slow, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Weight distribution, 60% left hip, 40% right. The slight imbalance suggesting a comfort that had been earned over hours of sitting. Muscle tension, deliberately low, the relaxation performed rather than felt. Every major muscle group engaged in the performance of ease. Eye movement, slow lateral tracking, a 2-second delay between visual input and visible response, as if the information was being filtered through a second consciousness before it was allowed to register on the face. Bruce had seen this before, not in actors, in fighters, in martial artists who had trained for decades and who could enter a state where the self dissolved and only the practice remained. He called it no mind. The Japanese called it Mushin. It was the state where the fighter vanishes and the fight becomes the only thing in the room, where the distinction between the person and the discipline collapses, where the body does not wait for the brain to issue commands because the body and the brain have merged into a single instrument that responds to stimuli without the delay of conscious thought. This man had found the same state, through a completely different door. Jerry approached the leather chair. He leaned down and spoke quietly. "Sir, this is Bruce Lee, a friend of mine. He's a martial arts instructor." The man in the chair did not look at Bruce. His eyes remained half closed. The left hand continued its 3-inch stroke on the cat's back. 4 seconds, 3 inches, 4 seconds, 3 inches. After 4 seconds of silence, a long 4 seconds, the kind that make a room feel like it's filling with water from the floor up, the man raised his right hand from the armrest, not to shake Bruce's hand, to wave it away. The back of the hand, palm facing the floor, fingers extended and curling once in a slow, dismissive arc. The gesture traveled approximately 8 inches from left to right. It lasted less than a second. It contained more authority than most men generate in a lifetime. It was the gesture of a man who decides who enters and who does not, who exists and who does not. It was not rude. It was not personal. It was the character. The character had assessed the visitor, found him irrelevant, and dismissed him with emotion so small and so total that arguing with it would have been like arguing with gravity. Jerry shifted uncomfortably. He touched Bruce's elbow. "Sorry," he whispered. "I told you. He's not there." Bruce looked at Jerry. Then he looked at the man in the chair. Then he extended his right hand. He held it in the air, 15 feet from the seated man, palm open, fingers together. The hand that could travel from rest to a man's jaw in 6/100ths of a second hung motionless in the stale air of a Hollywood staging area for 3 full seconds. The seated man did not look at the hand, did not acknowledge it, did not adjust his posture or change the rhythm of his thumb on the cat's back. Bruce pulled his hand back. He lowered it to his side. He did not show anger. He did not show embarrassment. He did not show the kind of wounded pride that most men would feel when the most powerful actor in the world treats them like a draft coming under a door. He looked around the staging area. Along the wall to his left, a row of folding chairs leaned against the concrete metal frames, canvas seats, the kind of chairs that crew members use during long lighting setups and forgot about between takes. Bruce walked to the wall. He selected a chair. He carried it to a spot 15 feet from the leather chair, the same distance as the refused handshake, and opened it. The legs scraped against the concrete. The canvas seat sagged slightly as he sat. He placed his hands on his knees. He leaned back. He crossed his ankles. He settled his weight into the chair with the same deliberate ease that the seated man had settled into the leather, and he looked at the man in the chair, not with anger, not with expectation, with the same half-lidded, patient focus that the man in the chair was using to look at the room. Bruce matched the energy, absorbed it, reflected it back. 2 men watching each other without watching each other. 2 forms of discipline occupying the same concrete floor and breathing the same recycled air. Jerry stood between them, confused. "Bruce, we can go. I'll show you the other stages. There's a Western shooting on 12. I'm fine here," Bruce said. Jerry waited 5 seconds, then 10. Then he turned and walked back through the corridor toward the main set. Bruce sat in the folding chair. The man sat in the leather chair, 15 feet of concrete between them, a cat purring on one man's lap, nothing on the other man's lap except his own hands. The staging area was quiet. A cable hummed somewhere overhead. The coffee urns on the craft services table ticked as they cooled. A fly circled the Italian sandwiches and landed on a slice of capicola. A man who could cross 15 feet in under half a second chose to sit in a folding chair and not move. Speed was Bruce Lee's weapon. Patience was his ambush. The first 5 minutes were the hardest, not because anything happened, because nothing happened. 2 men sitting in chairs 15 feet apart on a concrete floor in a staging area that smelled like sawdust and cold coffee and the faint chemical sweetness of theatrical makeup. 1 man in a leather chair with a cat on his lap and a character inside his skin. The other in a folding chair with his hands on his knees and nowhere to be. Crew members passed through. A PA carrying a clipboard asked Bruce if he needed water. He said no. A lighting technician dragged a C-stand across the floor, its metal legs scraping the concrete. A wardrobe assistant walked past carrying a garment bag and didn't look at either man. The staging area was a corridor between work and rest, and the people who moved through it had learned months ago to treat the man in the leather chair the way you treat a piece of the set. Present, immovable, not to be addressed unless he addresses you first. Bruce watched, not casually, not the way a bored man watches a television in a waiting room. He watched the way he watched everything, with the full analytical attention of a man who had spent 20 years studying how human bodies move, hold, breathe, and reveal. He read the seated man the way a cardiologist reads an EKG. Every line meant something. Every rhythm told a story. The breathing, 4 seconds in through the nose, 6 seconds out through barely parted lips. The exhale was audible if you listened. A faint rasp that carried the texture of the cotton in the cheeks. The breath was not the actor's breath. Bruce was certain of this by minute 3. A 47-year-old man in reasonable health breathes at a different rate than this. This breathing was slower, heavier, weighted with the specific gravity of a man in his mid-60s whose lungs had been processing cigar smoke and New York winters for 4 decades. The actor had changed his breathing to match the character. The lungs were performing, the hand on the cat, thumb traveling from crown to ears. 3 inches. Bruce counted the strokes, every 4 seconds, no variation, no pause, no moment where the hand forgot what it was doing and defaulted to the actor's natural rhythm. The hand belonged to the character. The character had decided that this was how he touched a living thing, with measured, metronomic control, not tenderness, authority. Even the cat was being governed. The micro-expressions. A slight downward pull at the left corner of the mouth. Not a frown, not a grimace. A held position that suggested displeasure kept on a leash. The expression said, "I am displeased, but I will not show you how displeased, because showing you would give you information, and I do not give information." The expression was not the actor's. The actor had no reason to be displeased. The character had every reason. The character lived in a state of permanent, controlled dissatisfaction with a world that did not meet his standards, but that he had learned to manage through patience and violence, applied in careful sequence. By minute 10, Bruce stopped analyzing and started watching. The difference was the difference between reading a poem word by word and hearing a poem read aloud. He let the performance wash over him, the way music washes over a listener who has stopped trying to identify the instruments and started feeling the composition as a single thing. What he saw was extraordinary. He saw a man who was not there. The leather chair held a body, and the body was breathing and blinking and stroking a cat. But the person who owned the body had left. Someone else was running the machinery. The actor had vacated. Not partially, not mostly, complete. The man sitting in that chair was Vito Corleone, not a version of Vito Corleone, not an approximation. The man himself, a fictional person made real through a commitment so total that the word acting was an insult to what was happening. This was not acting, this was possession. Voluntary, disciplined, reversible possession. The actor had opened a door inside himself, invited a dead man in, and handed him the keys. Bruce recognized this because he had experienced it. In martial arts he called it no mind. The state where the fighter dissolves and only the fight remains. Where the fist doesn't wait for the brain because the fist and the brain are the same thing. Where the person standing in the ring is not Bruce Lee but something that uses Bruce Lee's body. Something faster, something purer, something that doesn't carry the weight of a name or a history or a fear. He had written about this state. He had taught it. He had lived inside it during fights that lasted seconds and felt like hours. This actor had found the same state through a completely different door. Not through combat, through cotton in his cheeks and a rose on his lapel, and a cat on his lap, and the slow, patient construction of a human being who had never existed and who was now, in this staging area, more present than anyone else in the building. By minute 25, Bruce was no longer watching a performance. He was witnessing a disappearance. The actor was inside the character, the way water is inside a glass, completely, conforming to the shape invisible as a separate substance. You couldn't see where the actor ended and the character began, because there was no seam, no gap, no flicker of self-consciousness, no moment where the man in the chair broke the surface to check if anyone was watching, or to adjust a detail, or to remember that he was in fact a 47-year-old from Omaha, Nebraska, pretending to be a 65-year-old from New York City. The pretense was gone. The man from Omaha was gone. Only the Sicilian remained. Minute 35. The cat stretched, its back arched, its claws extended into the fabric of the man's trousers and retracted. It yawned, a long, jaw-cracking yawn that showed every tooth, and then it jumped down from his lap and walked away across the concrete floor toward the craft services table, where it had identified the capicola. The man's lap was empty. His left hand, The hand that had been stroking the cat for 35 minutes with metronomic precision stopped. The thumb hovered in the air, still curved in the shape of the cat's skull, still following the path from crown to ears. But there was nothing beneath it. The hand was stroking air, the fingers curled around the ghost of a shape that had walked away. He looked at his own hand. Bruce saw it happen. The moment. The exact moment. It was not dramatic. It was not a convulsion or a gasp or a sudden straightening. It was a light turning on inside a house that had been dark for hours. The eyes changed first. The half-lids rose. The heavy, calculating, Sicilian surveillance gaze softened and then sharpened and then changed register entirely. Same eyes, different person looking through them. The jaw followed. The downward pull at the left corner of the mouth released. The tension in the masseter muscle dissolved. The jowls, which had been held in a specific position by the character's habitual expression, relaxed into a slightly different hang. The cotton in his cheeks seemed to loosen, as if even the prosthetic recognized that the scene was over. The voice came last. He hadn't spoken in 40 minutes. When he spoke now, the voice was different. Not the raspy, barely audible whisper that had been issuing orders and dismissing visitors. This voice was lighter, clearer. It came from a higher place in the throat, with a Midwestern openness that the character's voice had deliberately buried. This was the voice of the actor, the man from Omaha, the man who had been underneath the character for hours, maintaining the machinery, keeping the systems running, and who had now surfaced because the cat had left, and the hand had nothing to hold, and the character for one moment had lost its grip. He looked at Bruce. For the first time in 40 minutes, he looked directly at Bruce Lee. Not through him, not past him, at him. His eyes focused on the man in the folding chair who had been sitting 15 feet away for 40 minutes without moving, without speaking, without checking a watch, without fidgeting, without doing anything except watching with the same patient, half-lidded focus that the character had been using to watch the room. The man stood up from the leather chair. He straightened his suit jacket. He adjusted the rose on his lapel. He walked across the 15 feet of concrete floor, the same 15 feet that Bruce could have crossed in under half a second, and had chosen not to cross for 40 minutes, and stopped in front of the folding chair. He looked down at Bruce Lee. "Nobody waits for me," he said. Bruce looked up at him. "I wasn't waiting for you," Bruce said. "I was watching you disappear inside another man." The actor stared at Bruce for 6 seconds, 6 full seconds, the length of a held breath, the length of time it takes for a sentence to travel from the ear to the place in the brain where meaning lives, and settle there with its full weight. Then he sat down, not in the leather chair. He turned, walked 3 steps to the wall, pulled a folding chair from the row, carried it back, opened it next to Bruce's chair and sat. Metal frame, canvas seat, no leather, no desk, no cat, no character, 2 men in folding chairs on a concrete floor. "Nobody has ever described it that way," he said, "because nobody has watched it the way I just did," Bruce said. The man sitting next to Bruce Lee in a folding chair was not simply an actor. He was the actor, the gravitational center around which the entire craft of screen performance had orbited for 20 years. His name was Marlon Brando, born April 3rd, 1924, in Omaha, Nebraska, 5'9", 170 pounds in 1972. The man who had detonated the old style of Hollywood acting in 1951 with A Streetcar Named Desire and replaced it with something so raw and so real, dangerous that audiences didn't know whether they were watching a performance or a confession. On the Waterfront, The Wild One, Last Tango in Paris, 2 Academy Awards, one of which he refused. A man who had been called the greatest actor of his generation so many times that the phrase had lost all meaning and become simply a fact, like gravity or the speed of light. In March 1972, he was finishing the role that would define him more than any other, Vito Corleone. The Godfather, a film that would premiere in 2 weeks and become the highest-grossing picture of the year and win the Academy Award for Best Picture and change the way the world thought about cinema and power and family and violence for the next 50 years. This man had just sat in a folding chair because a 135-pound martial artist in a grey t-shirt had described his craft in 12 words, with more precision than any critic, any journalist, any director, and any fellow actor had managed in 20 years of trying. Brando asked Bruce what he had seen during the 40 minutes. Bruce described it the way he described a fighting stance, with clinical, anatomical specificity. Your breathing changed first, 4 in, 6 out. That's not your rhythm. That's his. Your natural breathing is closer to 3 and 4. You slowed it by 30% to match a man 20 years older. The breath changed the thought speed. The thought speed changed the face. The face changed the room. Brando listened without interrupting. The hand on the cat, 3 inches per stroke. You never varied. Not once in 35 minutes. That's not discipline. That's occupation. You weren't deciding to stroke the cat that way. The character was deciding. You were following orders from inside your own body. The moment you came back, Bruce continued, was when the cat left. Your hand kept moving, 3 strokes on nothing. Then you looked at your hand, and the character didn't know what to do without the prop. That's when you surfaced. You didn't decide to come back. The character lost its grip. You were the last one to know. Brando was quiet for 8 seconds. Then he leaned forward in the folding chair, elbows on his knees. Nobody has ever watched me work from the outside and described what happens on the inside. Bruce shook his head. I didn't describe the inside. I described the technique. The inside is yours. I can't see the inside, but the technique is visible to anyone who knows what disappearing looks like. And you know what it looks like? I do it every day. Different door, same destination. Brando studied Bruce the way Bruce had studied him, not casually, with the focused attention of a master recognizing another master's fingerprints on a shared wall. Tell me about your door, Brando said. Bruce explained. In Jeet Kune Do, the fighter enters a state where the self dissolves. The punch doesn't wait for the brain. The kick doesn't ask permission. The body responds to the opponent's movement before conscious thought can intervene. I start with one physical truth, a stance, a breath, a single punch, and I follow it until everything is connected, until there's no gap between me and the technique, until I'm gone, and only the fight is left. Brando nodded slowly. I start with one physical lie, cotton in my cheeks. That changes my mouth. My mouth changes my voice. My voice changes my thoughts. My thoughts change my posture. My posture changes my walk. My walk becomes the man. I start with a lie and follow it until everything is true. You start with a lie that becomes true, Bruce said. I start with a truth that becomes complete. Same destination, different starting points, different doors, same room on the other side. Brando asked Bruce to show him, not a fight, not a technique, the state itself, the disappearance. Bruce stood. He closed his eyes. He shifted. The change was subtle and absolute, visible to Brando because Brando knew what to look for. Bruce's breathing slowed. His posture settled 2 inches lower. His shoulders dropped. His face emptied. Not went blank. Emptied. The muscles around his eyes released. The jaw softened. The personality drained from his features, the way color drains from a sky after sunset. What remained was not a man, it was an instrument. A body tuned to a single frequency and waiting for a signal. There, Brando whispered. Right there, that's it. That's what I do. That's exactly what I do. His voice carried the tone of a man who has just heard his own language spoken by a stranger in a foreign country. You did it in 4 seconds. It takes me an hour. Bruce opened his eyes. The personality returned. The face refilled. He sat down. Speed is my version, Bruce said. Depth is yours. Neither is better. A PA appeared in the staging area doorway. Mr. Brando, they need you for the next setup. 5 minutes. Brando didn't look at the PA. He looked at Bruce. Come back, he said. Come back and watch the next scene. Stand behind the camera. Tell me what you see from out there. I'll see the same thing I saw today, Bruce said. A man leaving the room without walking out of it. Brando extended his hand. His right hand, the same hand that had waved Bruce away 40 minutes earlier. The back of that hand had dismissed Bruce without a word. Now the palm was open, facing up, offered. Bruce took it. The handshake was firm but unhurried, not competitive. 2 men who had spent 40 minutes reaching an understanding that most people never reach in 40 years. The grip held for 3 seconds longer than a normal handshake. Brando, you waited 40 minutes for me. Nobody does that. Bruce, I told you. I wasn't waiting for you. I was watching the other man leave. Brando released the hand. He stood. He turned and walked back to the leather chair. He sat. The cat, which had returned from its exploration of the craft services table, jumped onto his lap and curled into the familiar depression between his thighs. Brando's left hand found the cat's head, thumb on the crown, 3 inches, crown to ears. The rhythm resumed, the breathing deepened, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. The jaw sank, the jowls settled, the eyes closed to half-lids. The downward pull returned to the left corner of the mouth. The rose on his lapel caught the overhead light. 8 seconds. That was all it took. The actor vacated. The character moved back in. The door opened. The man from Omaha stepped out, and the man from Sicily stepped in, and the transition was so complete and so fast that Bruce, watching from 15 feet away, felt a chill travel up his forearms. Vito Corleone sat in his leather chair, stroking a cat, governing a room, deciding who existed and who didn't. Marlon Brando was gone. Bruce stood. He folded his canvas chair and leaned it against the wall. He looked at the man in the leather chair for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked out of the staging area, through the corridor, through the fire door and into the California sunlight. He didn't look back. There was nobody to look back at. The man he'd been talking to had already left. The Godfather premiered on March 15th, 1972. It became the highest-grossing film of the year. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Marlon Brando won Best Actor. He sent a woman named Sacheen Littlefeather to decline the award on his behalf, in protest of Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. The audience booed. Brando didn't hear them. He was already inside his next character. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973, 16 months after the afternoon on the Paramount lot. He was 32 years old. Enter the Dragon premiered 6 days later. The man who couldn't get cast in Hollywood became the most famous martial artist in history without being alive to see it. Marlon Brando died on July 1st, 2004, at age 80. He and Bruce Lee shared something that neither man shared with anyone else in their fields: the understanding that mastery is not about performing a skill. It is about disappearing so completely into the skill that the person performing it ceases to exist. Neither man publicly mentioned the other. There is no photograph, no interview, no record. But in Bruce Lee's personal notebook, among hundreds of pages of training philosophy and technique diagrams, there is a single line dated March 1972. Watched an actor disappear today. Same door, different room. He uses cotton, I use fists. We both leave the same way. In March of 1972, a man in a leather chair waved away a man in a folding chair. The back of a hand, a single gesture, the dismissal of a king. The man in the folding chair didn't leave. He sat for 40 minutes. He watched. He saw something nobody else on that set had ever seen. The exact moment a man returns to himself after being someone else. 40 minutes later, the man in the leather chair stood up, crossed 15 feet of concrete, and sat in a folding chair. The distance was 15 feet. The journey was much longer. He wasn't waiting. He was watching a man disappear. And the man who disappeared came back because someone had finally seen him leave.